Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today, we're opening a file on a figure who is, technically classified as an economist, but that label, it just feels a little too small, maybe too rigid for the ground he covers.
It really does. We are talking about Amartya Sen.
Exactly. And the reason we've pulled this massive stack of research, we've got his biography, Poverty and Famines, Development as Freedom, the idea of justice. It's because Sen didn't just, add a few formulas to the field. He essentially rewired its moral circuitry.
That's a really good way to put it.
Mhm.
Usually when we talk about economics, especially the classical kind, we're talking about the how.
Right. How do we get growth? How do we move resources around efficiently?
How do we balance supply and demand, all of that.
Cool.
Sen stepped back from the whole machine and asked a much simpler but much bigger question. Why?
What's the point?
What is the point of all this growth? If a country is rich in terms of its GDP, but its people aren't free, or they're dying from things we know how to prevent, does the money actually matter?
It feels like the difference between being a mechanic, tinkering with the engine, and being the architect who's actually designing the whole vehicle and deciding where it's even supposed to go.
That's a perfect analogy. And to really understand the architecture he built, you have to look at the ground he stood on. Because his insights on famine, on gender inequality, on the very definition of poverty, they didn't come from a sterile textbook.
No.
They came from witnessing the very worst of what humanity can do to itself and then deciding that, that mathematics and rigorous logic could actually offer a solution.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to trace that arc. We're going to look at how a boy raised in what was, frankly, a progressive bubble in Bengal ended up winning a Nobel Prize for proving, and I mean mathematically proving, that starvation is almost never about a lack of food.
And we'll get into the liberal paradox, which is a real brain melter of a logic puzzle that challenges our basic ideas of freedom.
And we'll also discuss why he thinks GDP is just a terrible, terrible way to measure a human life.
Yeah, we should probably address the nickname he got early on, the one you hear a lot in the media. He's often called the Mother Teresa of economics.
Which, on the surface, sounds like this huge compliment. It implies, compassion, maybe even sainthood, this deep care for the poor.
Oh, it's definitely meant to be a compliment. It highlights his focus on poverty and inequality, which, believe me, was not the trendy topic in economics when he started his career. But Sen himself, he kind of chafes at it.
He doesn't like it.
No. He's the first to tell you he doesn't follow a lifestyle of dedicated self-sacrifice. He's not an ascetic. He enjoys a good glass of wine. He loves a really heated debate. He lives a very secular, very active life.
So he's not a saint, he's a scholar.
Precisely. And he believes that rigorous thinking, clear logic, does more for the poor in the long run than charity does. He's also been called the conscience of the profession, and I think that one fits a lot better.
That feels more accurate.
It is. He basically forced the entire profession to look up from their graphs and acknowledge the human reality behind the curves.
Okay, so let's start with that scholar part, because his origin story is famously intellectual. He was born in 1933 in a place called Santiniketan in Bengal, which was then British India.
And when you say born in Santiniketan, that carries a very specific weight in Indian history. It's something that might be lost on, say, a Western audience.
It's not just a pin on a map.
Not at all. Santiniketan wasn't just a town. It was an experiment. It was a university town, and it was established by Rabindranath Tagore.
The poet. The first non-European to win the Nobel Prize in literature.
The very same. Tagore was this massive looming figure in Sen's life from day one. Literally from day one. Tagore actually named him.
He named him?
Yes. He gave him the name Amartya, which in Bengali means immortal or heavenly.
Wow, that is a tremendous amount of pressure to put on an infant. Here's your name, kid. Try to live up to immortal.
Right, but the pressure there wasn't academic in the way we think of it now, which is really the key to understanding Sen's mind.
How so?
Sen went to Tagore's school. It was called Pathabhavana. And this school was, it was radically different from the British colonial education system that dominated India at the time.
So the British system was all about being rigid, focused on rote memorization, incredibly competitive.
Standardized testing, memorizing dates and names, that sort of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Tagore's school despised all that. They hated exams.
Hated them.
The whole philosophy was that competitive testing kills curiosity. It makes you learn for the test, not for the love of knowledge. So they focused on cultural diversity, they held classes outdoors under the trees, and they taught students to see India not as an isolated colony, but as part of this larger global tapestry.
So it's that foundation that gave him the flexibility to think outside the box later on.
Sen credits it directly. He wasn't trained to just tick boxes. He was trained to ask if the boxes were even the right shape to begin with. He was taught to question the premise.
It sounds like a liberal arts stream.
Yeah.
But he did eventually pivot pretty hard into, the hard sciences, math, economics.
He did.
Wow.
But he carried that foundational flexibility with him. He was taught from a young age to look for the connections between disciplines, between math and philosophy, between ethics and history, rather than just staying in one single silo.
So he has this almost idyllic, free-thinking foundation.
Yeah.
But then, as it always does, the real world intrudes. And it intrudes in a pretty violent way. Two specific traumas seem to define his early life and really set him on his path. The first one is intensely personal, his health.
Yes. This is when he's about 18 years old. He's a student at Presidency College in Calcutta. He's brilliant, he's young, he has a whole world ahead of him. And then he finds a lump in his mouth.
And it wasn't just nothing.
No, it was oral cancer. And you have to remember, this was the early 1950s. Cancer treatment wasn't anything like what it is today. The doctors gave him a truly grim prognosis.
What were the odds?
A 15% chance of living another 5 years.
15%. That's essentially a death sentence for a teenager. How did he even handle that? I think most people, regardless of how smart they are, would just shut down.
Yeah.
Or panic. Sen went to the library.
Of course he did.
It's a recurring thing with him. He didn't just passively accept what the doctors told him. He read up on the pathology of his specific carcinoma. He went through the medical texts himself. And he realized that the radiation treatment the doctors were kind of hesitant about, what was actually his only statistical shot at survival.
So he advocated for his own treatment based on his own research to his own doctors as a teenager.
He did. And you have to remember, radiation back then was a very blunt instrument. It was risky, it was damaging. But he calculated the odds. He looked at it rationally. He realized that doing nothing was a guarantee of death, and the radiation was a gamble. He took the gamble.
That's just incredible agency for an 18-year-old. It's almost like he treated his own life as an economic problem to be solved, weighing risks and probabilities and outcomes.
It really shows his temperament. Rationality over fear.
Yeah.
And he survived, obviously. But that experience, that ticking clock, it just lit a fire under him. He went to Cambridge Trinity College and just tore through the curriculum.
He was a prodigy.
Absolutely. He finished his PhD work so quickly that he was offered a department chairmanship back in India before he'd even technically graduated.
This is the stat that always blows my mind. He was appointed to head the new economics department at Jadavpur University in Calcutta. How old was he at this point?
He was 23.
23 years old. He was probably teaching students who were older than him.
Almost certainly.
Oh.
And he was managing professors who were his seniors by decades. But there was this undeniable brilliance that people just recognized. He wasn't just reciting what was in the textbook. He was already pushing the boundaries of the entire field.
Okay, so that's the first trauma, the brush with death, the prodigy. But then there's the second trauma. And this one seems to be the absolute key that unlocks his work on famine. It's the story of a man named Kader Mia.
This is the rosebud moment for Amartya Sen. It happened a bit earlier, during the partition of India in 1947. Sen was just a boy, maybe 10 or 11, playing in the garden of his family home in Dhaka.
And just for context, partition was the chaotic, incredibly bloody division of British India into India and Pakistan.
It was a bloodbath. Communal violence between Hindus and Muslims was just rampant. People who had lived side by side for generations as neighbors were suddenly killing each other in the street.
A truly horrific time.
Horrific. Sen's family was Hindu, living in a largely Hindu neighborhood. So inside their compound walls, it was relatively safe.
Relative being the key word there.
Very much so. Suddenly, the garden gate bursts open and a man stumbles in. He's bleeding profusely. He has been stabbed in the back with a knife.
Oh my God.
The man was Kader Mia, a Muslim day laborer.
He had come into this hostile Hindu neighborhood knowing the risk.
He had to. Sen's father rushed the man to the hospital, and the young Amartya Sen sat with him, gave him water. And even as a child, Sen had the presence of mind to ask him why. Why did you come here? You knew the riots were happening. You knew this was a death trap for a Muslim man.
And what did Kader Mia say?
As he was dying, he told the boy, I had no choice. My children had no food.
That's haunting.
It changed Sen's life forever. In that moment, he realized that Katermia didn't die simply because of religious hatred. That was the weapon, yes. The thug who stabbed him was driven by communal violence. But the cause, the fundamental reason Katermia was in that specific street at that specific moment, was poverty.
Because if he had had money, he could have stayed home where it was safe.
Exactly. If Katermia had had a savings account, or even just a few days' worth of food in the pantry for his family, he could have stayed indoors. He would have been safe. Sen later gave this a name. He called it economic unfreedom.
Economic unfreedom. That's a powerful phrase.
The lack of economic freedom, that extreme poverty,
Yeah.
it forced him to trade his physical safety for the mere chance of earning a wage to feed his kids. And Sen realized right then that you cannot separate economics from ethics, or from sociology, or from basic human safety. Poverty isn't just a lack of money. It's a lack of freedom to survive. It strips you of the agency to make safe choices.
Which leads us directly to 1981. This is the year Sen publishes Poverty and Famines, an essay on entitlement and deprivation. This is where he takes that gut-wrenching childhood realization and turns it into a rigorous mathematical economic proof.
And he targets a very specific, very common sense idea. It's called the Food Availability Decline Hypothesis, or FAD for short.
The FAD hypothesis, it sounds fancy, but as you said, it's just the common sense assumption most of us have. People are starving, therefore there must not be enough food.
Seems logical, right?
Same.
If I open my fridge and it's empty, I go hungry. So if a country's pantry is empty, the whole country goes hungry.
Makes perfect sense. But Sen says it's wrong.
He says it's dangerously simplistic. A country isn't a fridge. He went back and looked at the data from the Great Bengal Famine of 1943, a famine that killed between 2 and 3 million people. He had witnessed this as a child. He saw people dying on the roads of Calcutta.
So he went back to the archives, to the records, he looked at the crop yields.
He looked at the numbers, and what he found was stunning. He found that in 1943, the year of the famine, the total food supply in Bengal was only about 5% lower than the previous 5-year average.
Only 5%. That doesn't sound like enough to cause millions of deaths.
It's not. But here is the real kicker. The food supply in 1943 was actually higher than it was in 1941.
Wait, say that again?
There was more food available in total during the famine year than there was 2 years prior in 1941. And there was no famine in 1941.
So, how is that possible? There was more food, but millions of people starved to death. That breaks the simple supply and demand logic.
It shatters it. It proves that the problem wasn't a lack of supply. The food was physically there. So Sen introduced a new concept to explain why people couldn't get to it. He called it the entitlement approach.
Okay, we need to define that carefully because entitlement means something very different in, modern political discourse.
Very different. In Sen's economic terms, your entitlement is the set of all the different combinations of goods and services you can legally acquire. It's based on 2 things. What you own, he calls this your endowment, like your land, or more likely just your ability to work, and what the market will give you in exchange for that.
So my labor is my endowment, and my wage is what the market gives me for it.
Exactly. And he says starvation happens when your entitlement set collapses. It's when you can no longer legally acquire enough food to live, regardless of how much food is actually sitting in the warehouses of the country.
So how did that play out in the Bengal famine? If the rice was there, why couldn't people get it?
It was what Sen called a boom famine. This is counterintuitive. World War II was raging. The British government was pouring money into Calcutta to fund the war effort. There was this massive industrial boom to support the military.
So factories are humming. There's a lot of money in the city.
A ton of money. Urban wages shot up. People in the city, factory workers, soldiers, government clerks, they had money, and they started buying rice, hoarding rice.
So the demand in the city skyrocketed, driving prices way up.
Exactly. But the rural landless laborers, the people like Katermia, the people who didn't own farms but just worked for a daily wage, their wages were fixed. They didn't get a raise. They were completely disconnected from this urban boom.
So the price of their staple food goes up, but their income stays completely flat.
And not just up a little. The price of rice doubled, then tripled, then quadrupled in a very short time. Suddenly, a full day's labor, which used to buy your family 2 bowls of rice, now bought you a handful. Their purchasing power just evaporated.
They didn't starve because the rest disappeared. They starved because the market mechanism literally priced them out of existence.
That's it. Their entitlement to the food that was right there in their own country collapsed.
That is a chilling, chilling realization. The market, in a sense, worked perfectly. It allocated the scarce resource rice to those with the most money. It just so happened that the result of that perfect allocation was mass death.
And that is Sen's fundamental critique. You cannot just look at the total pile of food, the aggregate supply. You have to look at the mechanisms of distribution. Who has the entitlement to eat? Who has the economic power to command food in the market? That's the only question that matters.
He took this a step further, though. He moved from pure economics to politics with a statement that is probably his most famous quote. I mean, I have seen this cited everywhere.
Oh yeah, this is the big one. No famine has ever taken place in the history of the world in a functioning democracy.
It's an incredibly bold claim. The word never is a very strong word for a historian or an economist to use.
It is. He's essentially daring historians to find a counterexample.
Yeah.
And so far, it holds up remarkably well. He points to India before independence, regular devastating famines under British colonial rule. After India became a democracy in 1947, not one major famine.
But why? Is there something magical about putting a ballot in a box that makes corn grow?
It's not magic. It's about incentives and information. Sen argues that famines, technically speaking, are actually very easy to prevent. We know how to move food from one place to another. We know how to set up public works programs to give people cash to buy food. The problem is never technical. It's always a lack of political will.
The government has to want to stop it.
It has to be forced to want to stop it. In a democracy, you have an opposition party. You have newspapers. You have a free press. If people start dying in the streets from starvation, what's going to happen?
It's going to be front-page news. The opposition is going to scream about it in Parliament.
The newspapers will run photos of starving children, the government will be hammered in the press, and they will be summarily voted out in the next election. It's political suicide to ignore a famine.
So the government has a selfish, institutional survival instinct to stop the famine. They don't want to lose their jobs.
Precisely. The fear of losing power forces them to act. Now, contrast that with an authoritarian regime. Take Mao's China during the Great Leap Forward.
Where tens of millions of people died of starvation.
Estimates go from 30 to 45 million. It's one of the worst famines in human history. Sen points out that the Chinese government didn't change its disastrous agricultural policies for 3 full years while people were dying. Why?
Because they didn't have to.
They didn't have to. Mao didn't face elections. There was no free press to report on the starvation. In fact, it was the opposite. Local officials were so terrified of the central government that they lied and reported record harvests to please the party.
So there was no feedback loop, no truth-telling mechanism.
Mao could let 30 million of his own people die and still wake up the next morning as chairman of the Communist Party. He was completely insulated from the consequences of his own catastrophic failure.
So things like free speech and a free press,
Yeah.
they aren't just abstract civil liberties or, nice things to have for political scientists to talk about. In Sen's view, they are literal insurance policies against mass starvation.
That is the absolute core of his philosophy. Political rights are economic rights. You cannot separate them. You can't follow the model that says, let's fix the economy first and then we'll worry about democracy later. The democracy is the tool that fixes the economy when it breaks for the poorest people.
This brings us perfectly to what he calls the capability approach. This is the intellectual framework he built to replace, or at the very least, to supplement GDP as our main measure of progress.
Right. Because if you accept that you can have a rich country with a famine if the distribution is bad, then it immediately follows that GDP is a terrible, terrible scoreboard for human success.
So standard economics looks at things like utility or income. Do you have a dollar in your pocket? Does it make you happy?
Those are the traditional questions. Sen says those are the wrong questions. We shouldn't be asking what people have. We should be asking what are people capable of doing and being.
Okay, so he makes this key distinction between functionings and capabilities. These sound like academic jargon, so let's really break them down into plain English.
Let's do it. Think of functionings as the outcomes, the things you actually achieve in your life. Are you well-fed? Are you literate? Do you participate in your community? Are you healthy? Those are all functionings. They are states of being and doing.
Okay, the end result, what you actually are.
Right. Capabilities, on the other hand, are the freedoms you have to achieve those outcomes. It is the set of real, genuine opportunities you have to choose from. It's about choice.
The classic example he uses to explain this is the difference between fasting and starving.
Yes, and it's the perfect illustration. It's so clear. Imagine two people. Person A is a wealthy person who is fasting for religious reasons, or maybe they're on a hunger strike for a political cause.
Okay.
Person B is a destitute person who is starving because they have no money to buy food.
Now, if we just look at them from a purely nutritional standpoint, if we measure their functioning of being nourished, they are identical. Both are hungry, both are consuming 0 calories.
If your doctor just looks at the chart, it's the same. Their functioning is identical, but their capability is totally different. The person who was fasting chose not to eat.
They had the option.
They had the capability to eat, the food was available, they had the money, but they freely chose not to exercise that capability. The starving person had no such choice. Their capability set with respect to food was empty.
So true freedom, true development isn't just about the outcome. It's about having the choice.
Exactly. And for Sen, development is the process of expanding those choices. It's not just about raising the average income. It's about removing the unfreedoms that restrict our choices. Things like illiteracy, lack of healthcare, lack of public transportation, or a lack of basic civil rights.
And it's interesting how he applies this to the so-called first world, too. It's not just a theory about poor countries. You can be rich in terms of income, but very poor in capabilities.
Absolutely. He famously did this comparison of mortality rates. He looked at African-American men in certain inner-city areas in the U.S., like Harlem, and compared them to men in, say, Kerala, India, or in Bangladesh.
And what did he find?
He found that the men in Harlem, despite having a much, much higher income per capita than a peasant in Bangladesh, actually had lower life expectancies at certain ages. They were less likely to survive to age 40 or 50.
So they had more cash in their pockets, but less actual life.
Less capability to live a long and healthy life. Because of the high risk of violence, the lack of access to quality health care, the chronic stress of systemic racism, all these things restricted their real freedom to flourish. So in terms of that specific capability, the ability to live a long, healthy life, the man in Kerala who was monetarily much poorer was actually richer.
That completely reframes the whole developed versus developing world narrative. It stops being just about who has the most factories or the highest stock market.
It completely changes the game. And it's why he was so instrumental in helping to create the Human Development Index, the HDI, for the United Nations.
Right. That was with Mahbub Halek.
Yes, the Pakistani economist who really spearheaded the HDI. He was a close friend of Sen. And Hawke famously told Sen, "We need a number that is just as vulgar as GDP, but stands for something better."
As vulgar as GDP, I love that.
He wanted a single, simple number that would force politicians to look at health and education, not just industrial output. And that's what the HDI does. It combines income with life expectancy and literacy rates. It's a direct application of the capability approach.
Okay, I want to pivot here to something a bit naughtier. We've talked about famine and freedom, which are big, tangible, gut-level concepts. But Sen is also a philosopher and a logician. He spent a lot of his career deep in the weeds of something called social choice theory.
This is the stuff that gives economics graduate students nightmares. It really goes back to his time at Cambridge and his deep engagement with the work of people like Kenneth Arrow.
So the basic question of social choice theory is what? How do we decide what society wants? I mean, we know what you want and we know what I want. But how do we aggregate all those individual preferences into a single, coherent social choice?
It sounds simple on the surface, right? Just take a vote. Majority rules. What's the problem? But Kenneth Arrow, in his famous impossibility theorem, proved that it's mathematically impossible to create a perfect voting system that satisfies just a few very basic, common sense fairness conditions.
So you can't have a perfect system.
I can't. And Sen took this already mind-bending idea and broke it even further with something called the liberal paradox, or sometimes just Sen's paradox.
Okay, walk us through this slowly, the liberal paradox.
All right, Sen proved mathematically that you cannot have a society that simultaneously respects two things we all think are good: minimal liberalism and Pareto efficiency. They are, in some cases, fundamentally incompatible.
That sounds bad. Because we want both of those things. We want individual rights and we want socially efficient outcomes.
We absolutely do. So let's define them clearly. Minimal liberalism just means that there is a personal sphere where an individual should get to decide, period. I get to decide what color shirt I wear. You get to decide what book you want to read in the privacy of your own home. Society shouldn't get a vote on my private matters.
Seems completely reasonable. A basic right.
And Pareto efficiency is also very simple. It just means that if everyone in society prefers option A to option B, then society as a whole should choose option A.
Also seems totally reasonable. If every single person likes ice cream better than eating broken glass, society should definitely choose ice cream.
Hard to argue with that. So these two principles both seem obviously good. Where does it all break down?
This is where the example comes in.
Right. Sedney uses this brilliant little story.
Mm.
It's called a Luden-Prude example. Imagine there's a single copy of a controversial book. Let's use the classic example, Lady Chatterley's Lover. And we have just two people in our society, Mr. Prude and Mr. Lude.
Okay. Mr. Prude, I'm guessing, hates the book.
He thinks it's filth. It's morally corrupting. His number one absolute first choice is that no one reads it. But, and this is the key, he thinks that if someone has to read it, he would rather read it himself.
Why?
To save Mr. Lude's soul from corruption. He sees it as a noble sacrifice. He doesn't want Lude to be exposed to this filth and enjoy it. So Prude's personal ranking of the three possible outcomes is, first, no one reads the book. Second, Prude reads the book. Third, and worst of all, Lude reads the book.
Okay, I follow that logic. Now, what about Mr. Lude?
Mr. Lude, as his name suggests, is very keen to read the book, but he's also a bit of a troll. He thinks the idea of the uptight Mr. Prude being forced to read this book is absolutely hilarious. The thought of shocking him is just too delicious. So Lude's personal ranking is first, Prude reads the book, second, Lude reads the book, and third, no one reads the book.
All right, we have the rankings. Now let's apply our principles. Let's start with minimal liberalism.
Minimal liberalism says there's a private sphere. So whether or not Mr. Lude reads the book should be up to him. Let's compare the options Lude reads and no one reads. Which does Lude prefer?
He prefers to read it. So liberalism says society should prefer Lude reads over no one reads.
Correct. Now let's look at Mr. Prude. Whether he reads it or not should be his business. Let's compare Prude reads and no one reads. Which does Prude prefer?
He prefers that no one reads it. That's his number one choice. So liberalism says society should prefer no one reads over Prude reads.
Exactly. So we have two liberal preferences. Lude reads is better than no one, and no one is better than Prude reads.
Okay, but now comes Pareto efficiency, the if everyone agrees rule.
Right. Let's look at the rankings again, and let's compare two specific outcomes, Prude reads versus Lude reads.
Okay. Mr. Prude prefers Prude reads over Lude reads. That's his second choice versus his third.
And what about Mr. Lude? He also prefers Prude reads over Lude reads. It's his first choice versus his second.
They both agree. They both want Prude to read the book more than they want Lude to read it.
Everyone agrees. So our principle of Pareto efficiency says that society must choose Prude reads over Lude reads.
But wait, we're trapped.
You see it. We have a logical loop. Liberalism says Lude reads is better than no one reads, and no one reads is better than Prude reads. So by logic, Lude reads must be better than Prude reads.
But Pareto says Prude reads is better than Lude reads. It's a contradiction, a paradox.
It's a perfect mathematical proof that mind your own business and do what's best for the group can sometimes be direct enemies. It shattered this utopian idea that we can design a perfect social system that satisfies all our ethical intuitions at once.
So what's the takeaway? The freedom is bad.
No, not at all. Sensterd's point is that we have to make value judgments. We have to choose which rights and principles matter more in which context. Math won't save us from making hard ethical choices. It forces us to have a public debate and admit that we can't have it all the time.
Speaking of ethics and hard numbers, let's talk about his work on gender inequality. In 1990, he dropped an absolute bomb on the academic and policy world with an article in the New York Review of Books. The title alone was a shock. It was called "More Than 100 Million Women Are Missing."
This was a seismic shift in how we talked about this issue. Before this article, gender inequality was usually discussed in terms of, the wage gap or education levels or the glass ceiling in corporations. Sen made it about life and death.
How did he even arrive at that number, 100 million?
It was actually a pretty straightforward but brilliant piece of demographic analysis. He looked at the ratio of women to men in different parts of the world. In Europe and North America, there are typically more women than men. The ratio is about 1.05 women for every man.
Why is that?
Women just tend to be biologically hardier, they have survival advantage, they survive infancy at higher rates, and on average live longer than men. So that 1.05 to 1 ratio is kind of the biological baseline in a neutral environment where both sexes get equal care.
Okay, so that's what should happen.
That's the biological norm. But when Sen looked at the population data for China, India, and large parts of West Asia and North Africa, the ratio was inverted. There were significantly fewer women than men. In some places, it was as low as 0.94 to 1.
So he just calculated the difference.
He calculated the gap between the expected number of women in those populations, based on the Western ratio, and the actual number of women that the census recorded. The shortfall was over 100 million.
That is the combined population of the UK and France. Just gone.
Missing. Gone. He argued that these women were missing due to what he called the mortality impact of unequal rights. It wasn't just about birth rates, though that was part of it. It was about selective abortion of female fetuses, which was becoming possible with ultrasound technology. It was about female infanticide in some areas. But mostly, it was about simple, grinding neglect.
Neglect in what way?
It's the accumulation of thousands of small, devastating decisions. Feeding the son first when food is scarce, taking the boy to the doctor right away when he has a fever, but waiting a day or two with the girl to see if she gets better on her own. Those small biases, multiplied over millions and millions of families, added up to a massive silent death toll.
Now, this theory was challenged, right? Because that's how science works. I remember an economist, Emily Oster, offered a biological rebuttal some years later.
Yes, and it was a very serious challenge. Emily Oster, who is a fantastic economist, published research arguing that high rates of hepatitis B in these same regions could explain the skewed sex ratio. Her argument was that women who carry hepatitis B are, for biological reasons, statistically more likely to give birth to boys.
So for a while, it looked like Sen might have been wrong. That it was a virus, not sexism.
It did. It was a major debate. But the story didn't end there. And this is a great example of science working as it should. To her immense credit, Oster continued her research. She gathered new and better data from China and other places, and she eventually realized that the prevalence of hepatitis B just wasn't high enough to explain the sheer magnitude of the gender gap.
So she changed her mind.
She publicly recanted her original conclusion. She wrote a follow-up explaining that her initial theory was wrong and that Sen's original point about social inequality and neglect was, in fact, largely correct.
That takes a lot of intellectual integrity.
It does. And in the end, it just reinforced the tragedy of Sen's finding. The women were missing because of how society valued them, or rather didn't value them.
It goes right back to that capability idea we were talking about. If you are born a girl in some of these regions, your fundamental capability to simply exist is compromised from day one just because of your gender.
And Sen is always quick to emphasize that this hurts everyone. It's not just a women's issue. It creates bride shortages. It fuels human trafficking. It distorts the labor market. It destabilizes society in profound ways. His point is always that freedom is interconnected. You can't suppress the rights and the very existence of half the population and expect the country as a whole to flourish.
Let's zoom out a bit to his broader worldview on justice itself. In 2009, he published a huge book called The Idea of Justice, and in it, he sort of picks a fight with another giant of 20th century political philosophy, John Rawls.
He does. And taking on Rawls is no small thing. John Rawls is the veil of ignorance guy. His idea was a thought experiment. If you wanted to design a perfectly fair and just society, you should imagine that you're behind a veil of ignorance. You don't know where you'll land in that society. You don't know if you'll be rich or poor, male or female, smart or not so smart, healthy or sick.
And because you don't know your own position, you'll design rules that are fair for everyone, because you might end up at the very bottom of the pile.
Exactly. It's a search for the perfect setup. The ideally just institutions. Sen has a name for this approach. He calls it transcendental institutionalism. And he thinks it's basically a waste of time.
A waste of time. Who doesn't want perfection?
Because, he argues, we can never actually agree on what perfect is. Is a perfect society libertarian? Is it socialist? Is it something else? We'll argue about it forever. And more importantly, we don't live in a philosophical classroom. We live in the real world with real injustices happening right now.
So what's his alternative?
He argues for what he calls a comparative approach. He says we shouldn't be asking what is the perfect society. We should be asking a much more practical question. Is this policy better than that policy? Does this action reduce injustice or does it increase it?
So don't worry about designing utopia from scratch. Worry about whether raising the minimum wage or eliminating a specific discriminatory law makes our current society more just today than it was yesterday.
Precisely. He borrows a concept from Adam Smith, the impartial spectator. It's about standing outside a specific situation and judging its fairness in a specific context, not trying to design a perfect machine from scratch. It's radical pragmatism. Sen wants to reduce injustice now, not wait for some theoretical consensus on the ultimate nature of the good.
This pragmatism and his willingness to engage in very public debate seems to get him into hot water in the real world of politics. We can't really ignore his current standing in his home country of India. He has been very, very vocal about the current government.
Yes, and we should report this carefully, just laying out the facts of the dispute. But the friction is undeniable. Sen has been a consistent and vocal critic of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government. He has argued that the government has encouraged what he calls fear-mongering.
And he brings it back to that core idea of his, government by discussion.
He always does. He says democracy isn't just about casting a vote every 5 years. That's just one small part of it. True democracy is the ability to discuss, to argue, to dissent without fear every single day. And he argues that if people are afraid to speak their minds, or if the government labels any form of dissent as anti-national, then you don't really have a democracy anymore. You just have an election machine.
He was also highly critical of the government's decision to revoke the special autonomous status of Kashmir.
He was. He called the detention of local political leaders there a classic colonial excuse. His argument is that you cannot impose development or integration on a people at gunpoint. It has to be a democratic process that involves their consent and their participation.
And the government and its supporters have pushed back pretty hard. There was the whole controversy surrounding Nalanda University.
Nalanda was a real passion project for Sen. The goal was to revive an ancient Indian center of learning, one of the world's first true universities, which had been destroyed centuries ago. Sen was appointed the first chancellor of the revived institution.
But he didn't serve a second term.
No, he withdrew his candidacy for a second term in 2015. He wrote a public letter to the board saying it was clear that the government wasn't enthusiastic about him continuing in the role. He felt the political pressure was making his position untenable.
It's a sad irony, really. The man who wrote the book on the argumentative Indian finds himself being pushed out of the argument by the state.
It's a profound irony, yes.
So let's close by humanizing the man a little. We've talked about the brain, the theories, the Nobel Prize. But what about the person? He's in his 90s now. And still going.
And still working, still writing. He's a fascinating character. He's an explicit atheist, but one who deeply identifies with these skeptical, argumentative traditions within Hinduism. He's been married 3 times. His first wife was a very famous Bengali writer, Nabinita Dev Sen. His second wife was Eva Colorni, an Italian economist who tragically died of cancer at a young age. And he's currently married to Emma Rothschild, who is herself a very distinguished historian.
And isn't one of his daughters a Bollywood actress?
Yes, Nandana Sen. He's a man who has always lived in the world, not just in an academic library. He used to be famous for just cycling all around the town of Santiniketan, just pedaling through the village, talking to people. His hobbies, he once said, were, I read a lot and I like arguing with people.
That sounds about right. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what is the one single idea that the listener should carry with them? We've covered so much ground, from Bengal to Cambridge, from starvation to the liberal paradox.
I think it's the redefinition of success. Sen's entire life's work teaches us that a successful life or a successful country isn't about the pile of stuff you possess. It's not about your income. It's about what you can do. It's about what you are free to be. Freedom is the ultimate metric. If you have money but you have no voice, you aren't developed. If you have plenty of food in the country but no security that you'll be able to access it, you aren't safe. Everything is connected.
The interconnectedness of freedoms. Political freedom, economic facilities, social opportunities, they aren't separate items on a checklist. They're all one single knot.
And if you pull too hard on one string, if you decide to suppress free speech, for example, in the name of economic growth, the whole knot tightens, the circulation gets cut off, and eventually the entire system fails.
That brings me to our final provocative thought for everyone to mull over. Sen defines democracy not as voting, but as government by discussion. And we are living in the noisiest, most information-saturated era in human history. We have social media, 24-hour news, comment sections everywhere. We have more speech than ever. But are we discussing?
That is the question, isn't it? Are we using our capability to reason with each other, to persuade, to listen? Or are we just shouting into our own echo chambers? Because if Sen is right, the moment we stop listening to the other side, the moment we lose the ability to argue, we aren't just being rude, we are actively dismantling the safety net that keeps us all alive.
Something to think about the next time you're doom scrolling. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Thank you. Keep arguing.